Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Undiscovered Games video podcast, where we take a look at the lesser-known board games of the world and share those with you. It's time for another installment of two-player board games you probably missed. This is part 3 of an ongoing series where I showcase a handful of games from my collection designed specifically for 2 players only. As usual, these will be lesser-known or forgotten older games, all of which I find very engaging and worth featuring here on this channel. I'll provide an overview of each game so you can get a feel for how it plays and what it's all about, and then hopefully that will help you decide if it's something you want to seek out. And if you want to see some other undiscovered 2-player games, check the video description below. I'll post some links to my other 2-player games episodes. And finally, before we get started, make sure you are subscribed right here on YouTube at undiscovered_games to learn more about lesser known board games. All right, let's get right into it today. I'm very excited for this list. We're going to start with a very undiscovered game called Atlanteon. This was designed by the one and only Dr. Reiner Knizia, one of my favorite game designers of all time. Now, this was originally published in 1992 under a different title called Revolution, but then it was reprinted in 2003 by Fantasy Flight under this title, Atlanteon, and that's the edition you see here. Notice it has the old school Fantasy Flight logo on the box, which is kind of cool. You don't see that anymore. And this is a very small, slim box, so it doesn't take up much shelf space at all. Atlanteon is a 2-player abstract tile placement game on a square grid, which uses area influence or area majority as its main mechanism. You're going to be placing these numbered tiles out on this grid, and every time a tile gets completely surrounded by other tiles, you will compare the strength of all the tiles involved, and whoever has the most strength gets to place their control disc out on that tile that is surrounded. The goal of the game is to try to get all your control discs out on the board before your opponent. There are 2 other ways to win the game, though. One is to surround and capture your opponent's king tile. That's an instant win. And another way to win instantly is to surround and capture all 3 of these wooden tower pieces. Really nice quality wooden bits here, which I'm always a fan of. And you might think the artwork looks a little dated or cheesy, but I think it looks kind of cool. It has like a retro 90s look to it. Very cool color scheme as well. I like the purples and the blues. It just kind of looks nice, when it's all set up on the table. So those are just some minor things, but let's talk more about the gameplay. So if you've ever played Reiner Knizia's more popular game called Samurai, which is one of my all-time favorites, or another little tile placement game he has called Kingdoms, you'll probably notice some similarities here with Atlanteon. And what I find interesting is this game actually came before Kingdoms and Samurai. So you can kind of see some of the origins of Knizia's ideas in the game design. And I just find that stuff kind of fascinating. So anyway, how do you play Atlanteon? Well, we're going to take a brief look at it. One player is going to play as the light tiles with the white control discs, and the other player will play as the dark tiles with the blue control discs. So give each player their supplies, keep all your tiles visible in front of you so your opponent can look over and see which numbers you've used already. There's no hidden information here. These tiles are numbered 0 through 9, and then there's one special tile called your king, which looks like this. Now you have to take turns seeding the board with these tower pieces. So you always start with the blue player. They pick any one of the 3 towers and place it anywhere on the board. There's a tile that goes with each of these towers, so just place the appropriate tile underneath that tower. Now the white player goes. They pick any one of the 2 towers and place it anywhere on the board, except they cannot place it orthogonally adjacent to the other tower. So let's say they place it here, put the tile underneath of it, and finally the blue player puts that last tower out on the board following those same rules. So when you set up the game, it should look something like this, but every time you play, it's going to be a little different depending on where those towers are set. So now you're set up and ready to play the game. The white player always goes first, and on your turn, it's very simple. You place one of your tiles on any open square of the grid. That's it. Classic Reiner Knizia simplicity here. However, there's a lot to consider when and where you place these tiles. After you place your tile, then you have to check to see if any tiles get scored. A tile will be scored as soon as it's surrounded on all 4 sides. So you don't count diagonally, but you look at all 4 sides around a tile. If those are occupied by other tiles, then you have to score it. Also, the edges of the board count as surrounding as well. So let me just show you a couple examples here. Let's say it was set up like this. My opponent has their 3 tile here. They have a 2 and a 1 up here. So if I place my 6 tile here, this tile is immediately surrounded. They add up all their strength, including the surrounded tile. So they add up a 2 plus 1 plus 3, that's 6. I add my strength, which is 6 plus 1 is 7. I control this tile. I put my disc out here. Now, just because my disc is on the tile doesn't mean it stops working. So when we score this tile, for example, my opponent's still going to add 3 to their influence level when we score these other tiles that it touches. Anyway, let's show you a more complex example. Let's say it's set up like this. My opponent has their 4 up here in the corner, and let's say I place my 3 tile here. Now this is going to completely surround this tile and this tile because the edges of the board count as surrounding a tile. So looking up here, my opponent has 4, I have 3 plus 1, which is also 4. So in the case of a tie, whoever places the tile to trigger scoring loses the tie. So up here, my opponent gets to place their disc on their 4 tile. But then we also have to score this tile. So by placing my 3, I have the majority down here, which means I place my disc on this tile. So there's a little give and take sometimes in this game. When you place a tile, you'll probably trigger multiple scorings, later in the game, and you have to really weigh which ones you want to give to your opponents and which ones you want to keep for yourself. Now, if that was all there was to the game, I would say, awesome, that's a great game right there. But like I always say, Reiner Knizia likes to sneak in a few extra layers of depth that really complicate your decisions. So let's talk about those other 2 ways to win the game. First, let's talk about the towers. If you can manage to capture all 3 towers, you instantly win the game. So capturing a tower works the same way as putting out a control disc. As soon as a tower gets completely surrounded, you compare influences with your opponent to see who captures the tower. Now, the white towers and the black tower work a little differently. All of them get captured, but the black tower allows you to put a control disc out on that square, whereas the white towers do not. You simply take the white tower and you leave it empty. Now, the black tower also works a little differently when you score it. The black tower goes to whoever has the least influence when it gets surrounded, whereas the white towers go to whoever has the most influence surrounding it. And once again, if there's a tie when you're comparing influences, whoever places that tile loses the tie. So if you can manage to capture all 3 of those towers in that manner, you're going to win the game instantly. But the black tower is kind of nice because you also get to place one of your control discs out, which counts toward getting all 11 of your discs out before your opponent, which is the other way to win the game. Now let's talk about the king tile, because that's the third way to win. If you can capture your opponent's king tile by, having the most influence surrounding that, you'll instantly win like that. The king tile exerts 0 influence, so why would you ever want to play it? Well, the most common way to win this game is getting all your discs out before your opponent, but you can only win that way if you have your king tile in play when you run out of discs. So you have to get that king tile out on the board, so you're always deciding that right moment to play that. It kind of feels like a wasted turn to play your king, and then once your king is out there, you have to protect him. You have to make sure he doesn't get captured by your opponent. So sometimes it's good to play your king early and then just make sure he's surrounded by your own tiles so your opponent can't capture your king. Or maybe you want to press your luck a little bit and place your king later in the game. The problem is you're going to have fewer and fewer safe spots to place him as the board fills up. So there's a nice little tension there from those alternate ways to win. Even though 9 times out of 10 the winner is going to be whoever gets their discs placed first, just the fact that those 2 other winning conditions are there complicate your decisions so much because you have to defend against those other winning conditions. I love that. I think this is an excellent design, way ahead of its time too. I think of the very popular 2-player game called Seven Wonders Duel, which has 3 possible winning conditions and how that, complicates your decisions of what to go for. Well, Reiner Knizia was doing that over 20 years before Seven Wonders Duel came out. Now, I'm not trying to compare these games. They're very different games, but I'm just saying I remember remember 2015 when Seven Wonders Duel first dropped. Everybody was hyping that game up because it had 3 different ways to win. It was like this fresh new idea that nobody had ever heard of at the time, and I was right there too. I was like, this is awesome. I've never seen this before. Well, it turns out now that I'm digging into the past, I'm finding lots of older games have multiple winning conditions. So I just find that kind of interesting. I don't know what it means. I just think it's cool to see older games that were doing it before it became popular. Now we're going to keep the list moving with another game that does have multiple ways to win, and this game is called Dynasties. This is originally from 2005. My printing is the 2005 version from Jolly Roger Games, and it was reprinted a few years later under a different title called Sun Tzu, and that is because the game is based on Sun Tzu's The Art of War. Now I will say the theme really does shine in the gameplay here. There's a lot of mind games you have to play with your opponent, and it sort of simulates the ideas that Sun Tzu talks about in his popular book. Now like I said, I have the old school edition with the beige board and the wooden cubes. That's just the vibe I like when I'm playing games like this, but some of you out there will probably like the Sun Tzu printing better because the map is colorful, it uses plastic miniatures, and the card artwork is beautiful in the Sun Tzu edition. So you can decide which version you want to go for, but let's get into the gameplay, the important stuff. Dynasties uses this secret unit deployment mechanism with your card play where you program your entire turn ahead of time and then you reveal your cards and compare them to your opponents. You also have a limited number of cubes or your armies that need to last you the entire game. So it's definitely a pacing game. It's a marathon, not a sprint, but it's only a 30 to 40 minute marathon. So it's not going to last forever. It's just the decisions in this game are agonizing. So each round, players are going to play one card face down into each region of the map. And then you're going to reveal those cards one at a time to see who wins each battle. So there's like one battle per region each round. To set up the game, you're going to place this white pawn in the center of this track here. This is like a tug-of-war track, so whenever you score more points than your opponent, you're going to move it toward your opponent. And when your opponent scores more points than you, they're going to move this toward you. If you ever manage to hit the red dot on your opponent's side of this track, you win instantly. So that's one way to win. The more common way to win the game is just after 9 rounds, and we do all the scorings, whichever side of the board this pawn is on determines who wins. So you want to have the pawn on your opponent's side when the game ends after 9 rounds. Those rounds are tracked with this black pawn here. As you can see, there are 9 rounds here. After each round, you'll just slide this black pawn down. Every 3rd round, there will be a scoring. So that's what these little arrows mean here. To set up the board, you're going to shuffle up these scoring tiles and randomly place one in each region. Now, the game suggests you place them here under the names of the regions, but I think it's much easier just to visualize it if you place them inside the actual regions on the board. So, what do these tokens show you? Well, this is how many points this region will be worth when it gets scored in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd scoring rounds. And those points are awarded to whoever controls each region when we score them. And I'll go over that more in a moment, but first we got to look at the cards. So each player starts the game with the same deck of cards. You have yellow numbered cards and then you have white cards. So keep the yellow numbered cards in your hand and then mix up all the white cards into a face down deck in front of you. So each player will have their own deck of white cards mixed differently. Now from your stack of white cards, draw 4 into your hand, and this will be your starting hand. You're going to have all your yellow cards plus 4 randomly drawn white cards. The only difference between the yellow and white cards is the white cards are one-time use. So once you play those, they're out of the game. Whereas the yellow cards, you get back into your hand every round. Each round, both players simply play one card from their hand into each region face down. And then you just reveal them one at a time and compare your strengths. Whoever has fewer cubes on the board gets to decide the order that these battles get resolved. And later in the game, that order becomes more and more important. The numbers on your cards indicate your strength in battle. So you just look at the difference between the cards that were played, and that determines how many cubes the winner gets to place into that region. So if I play a 4 here and my opponent plays a 5, my opponent wins by 1. So they place 1 cube into this region. That's the basic idea. Now, later in the game, there are going to be lots of cubes out here on the board already. So you have to use this simple 1-to-1 canceling out formula. So let's say I already already had 3 cubes here. I played a 3, and my opponent played a 5. Well, they win this battle by 2, but because I already have 3 cubes here, they just wipe out 2 of my cubes, and they don't place any. But these cubes are removed totally from the game. So you're kind of trying to deplete your opponent's cubes that are out there as much as possible. If I play a 1 and my opponent plays a 6, well, then they have to place 5 cubes out there, which depletes their supply quicker and sort of over-concentrates them in one region. And that's what you want to do to your opponent. You want to give them less flexibility to move their cubes around later. So I'll show you some more how this works. There's some special cards that add to your decisions. For example, the +1 card just means you have 1 more than whatever your opponent played. So if my opponent plays a 4 and I played the +1, well, that means I played a 5. But it just means I won the battle by 1 cube. So I would place 1 cube out or wipe off one of their cubes if they already have cubes there. The same works with the -1 card. If my opponent played a 5 and I played the -1, well, that's like I played a 4, but my opponent only wins by 1 cube. So maybe I want to play that -1 where I have a lot of cubes, knowing I'm only going to lose one of them in that battle. So the +1, -1 cards offer some really nice decisions, some fun strategies to try out there and sort of try to waste your opponent's good cards with those plus and minus cards. Now, another card in the deck is called the Plague. And whenever you play the Plague, it cancels out the battle completely and you just wipe off half the cubes from that region. And that's brutal because those cubes are out of the game completely. So you don't want to over-concentrate too many cubes in a single region because your opponent is definitely going to come in and play a Plague card and just kill off half your armies from that region. And that can be absolutely punishing in this game if you're not careful because your cubes are precious. You only get this limited supply. And another way they get depleted is when you play your 6 card. So the 6 yellow card can only be played once per region throughout the whole game. Anytime you play your 6, you have to take an army cube from your supply and mark that region. And what that says is you cannot play a 6 there for the rest of the game. So the more 6s you play, the fewer cubes you'll have to work with. Again, your cubes will run thin toward those later rounds of the game, so you need to keep as many as possible. Now, another card to note is the 1 card. So remember I said the yellow cards return to your hand at the end of the round. The white cards get discarded from the game completely. So after a round, after you do all of these regions, you take your yellow cards back, you discard your white ones, and then you get to draw 2 more cards off this deck into your hand, but you only get to keep 1. The other one goes back on the bottom of this deck. Now, if you played your number 1 yellow card, you actually get to draw 3 cards and keep 2. So by playing a low number, the yellow 1, you're giving yourself more flexibility for the next round of the game. You'll have an extra card to work with. So I love those little subtle decisions on top of the subtle mind games you have to play with your opponent. Which cards is my opponent playing where? But let me show you a quick scoring round so you can see how that works. So again, we do that same process 3 times and then we do a scoring round. So you're just going to move this pawn down each round. And when you get to round 3, finish that out and do a scoring. So at that point, whoever controls these regions will get the points showing on this tile. And this is the first scoring round. So we look at the first number on each tile. So let's say this is how it all shook out. I control this region for 3 points and this region for 2 points. So I have 5 and my opponent only controls this region down here worth 1 point. Nobody controls these regions. So the difference 5 to 1 means I win by 4. So I just push this 4 spaces toward my opponent. And that's how you keep score. If I ever hit my opponent's red dot, I win instantly. But ultimately, I just want to end this pawn on my opponent's half of the board by the time the game ends after 9 rounds. Now, the dynamics of the game get vastly different later on because once you run out of cubes from your supply, you have to start taking cubes from the board and moving them around. So like if I don't have any cubes left in my supply and I have to put 3 cubes into a region, I have to take those cubes from adjacent regions where I have cubes. And if I don't have any cubes in adjacent regions, then I can take them from anywhere on the map. But I have to put the full number of cubes into a region. And that's where the order that these battles get resolved becomes increasingly more important because players are playing with fewer and fewer options of where they have cubes and where they can move cubes. I suffer from really bad analysis paralysis in this game, but at the same time, I love the action programming thing where you're trying to outguess your opponent the whole time. Kind of of reminds me of the action programming in Shogun, which is a much bigger game, and it's one of my favorite area control games, by the way. But this game does it very simply and smoothly. It's almost like El Grande as well, where the scoring rounds happen every third round. And so there's definitely some, similarities to some of my favorite area control games. It's just stripped down into a quicker, simpler two-player format, and I really like that. So now we're going to go a little lighter with a dice chucking game for 2 players only, and I don't think I've featured a dice game yet on this channel for 2 players. This game is called Shanghaien, and this is by Roman Pellick and Michael Schacht, one of my favorite game designers of all time. And this game is actually quite tense for being a dice rolling game, but it gives the players some freedom to, drive the game. It has a really interesting scoring system too. In this game, players are competing to assemble the strongest team of sailors, and the sailors are basically just colors and numbers. So you're trying to collect sets of the different colors and have a stronger set than your opponent when you add them together. But the scoring system offers a neat twist. So basically at the end of the game, you're going to look at each set of colors that the players collected, and whoever has the stronger value when you add up the numbers is going to get the points. However, the points are only worth the value of your opponent's set of the same color. So if I end the game with yellow sailors that add up to 6, but then my opponent only managed to get 1 yellow sailor worth value of 1, I win the set. I have the stronger crew in yellow, but I only get 1 point because my opponent only had 1 in yellow. Now, if your opponent did not collect any of that color, then you get your own points. So once we play through this whole deck of cards, the game will end, and then we just basically compare each color and score it just like I showed you. Whoever has the stronger set gets their opponent's points in that same color. And if their opponent did not collect anything, then they get their own points. Whoever has the most points wins. It's a very simple idea, but that scoring system is so good. It absolutely makes the game, but so does the dice rolling. The dice rolling is pretty cool as well. So let me show you how to play this. To set up the game, give each player their pool of dice in their player color, and then you get one chunky wooden dude right here. Now this wooden figure is actually pretty pointless in this game. It adds some nice table presence, I guess, but basically whenever you activate a special card, you're going to place this wooden figure up here just to show that you've activated a special card, because you can only activate one special card each round. Anyway, shuffle this entire deck and reveal the top 6 cards into a row just like this. Determine a start player, and that start player decides which way these cards will be situated. So you're basically assigning an imaginary number to each card, either 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 like this, or the reverse, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These numbers just correspond to your dice rolls. So if you roll a 2, that would correspond to the second card in the row. If you roll a 5, that would correspond to the 5th card in the row, and so on. Now on your turn, you're going to roll exactly 2 of your dice and place 1 of them. Then your opponent goes. They roll exactly 2 dice and place 1. You just keep going back and forth. You roll 2, place 1. Now, as soon as you have at least 2 of your dice placed, instead of rolling, you could just choose to end the round and score it right there. So you can kind of decide to end the round whenever you want. However, when you start your turn, if you don't have 2 dice left, then you have to end the round. But you might want to end the round after you only have placed 3 of your dice, depending on how it's looking out there. And that's a really interesting decision, by the way. Let me just show you an example of how this might play out. Let's say it's the red player's turn, and they're going to first decide the order that these cards are situated. So let's say this is the first card, and that's the 6th card. Once that's established, it stays like that for the whole round. Now, red rolls exactly 2 dice. Let's say they roll a 3 and a 6. They could either place the 3 on the 3rd card or the 6 on the 6th card. So let's say they place the 3. Then it's my turn. I roll 2 dice. I roll a 3 and a 4. I could either place the 4 over here by itself, or I could challenge my opponent for this 3 card. So I place the 3. My opponent rolls a 2 and a 5. They place the 2. Then I roll a 6 and a 5. So I'm going to place the 5 over here. My opponent rolls a 1 and a 5, and they want to challenge me for that 5th card. So they put their 5 out. I roll a 2 and a 5. 5s are hot. I'm going to really want that card. I'm going to double down on that. I'm going to place another 5 under it. My opponent rolls. They roll a 1 and a 2. They place their number 1. I'm going to roll one more time. I roll a 5 and a 5. So that's brutal for me because I already have this one locked in, but I have to place another one out. Now my opponent decides they're going to stop rolling and end the round. So at that point, we just go through and divvy these cards out. So you go one at a time and you look at whoever played more dice next to that card, they get the card. So in our example here, red gets the first card because they had one die, I had none. Red also gets the second card for the same reason. The third card is a tie. We each have one die there. Whenever you are tied, you have to add up the total pip value of your neighboring dice. So you look at the dice directly to the left and the right, add up those numbers. Whoever has the higher total takes the card. So here you can see I, the blue player, have no dice to the left or the right of this card, but my opponent has their 2. So they will break the tie. Red gets this card as well. Now in that example, if I would have had a 4 here, then I would have broken the tie. I would have earned the card. So that's just, another thing to think about when you're placing your dice. Anyway, moving on to the 4th card. Nobody had any dice there. This card just gets removed from the game. The 5th card goes to me. I have more dice than my opponent. And finally, the 6th card also gets removed from the game. And that's the end of the round. To set up the new round, you just draw 6 new cards, switch start players. The new start player determines, which card is first, which card is 6th, and then you just do that all over again. So that's basically the game. You play through this whole deck. As soon as the deck is done, you score just like I talked about earlier. Now here's the twist. There are some special cards in this deck that you can also win. You win these cards the exact same way as you win the sailors. You're putting dice out. These come out randomly. And these special cards have 2 possible actions to choose from. So when you win these special cards, they kind of go into your reserve. And then whenever you want, you can activate 1 per round. And that's what your wooden figure is for. Whenever you choose to activate one of these special cards, you place your wooden figure up here. And that just shows that you cannot activate another special card until the next round. So there are several abilities on these cards. Each card shows 2, and whenever you activate it, you can only choose one of those 2 abilities. These do things like let you re-roll your dice or maybe place 2 dice instead of 1. There's even one that acts as a wild sailor of any color, but you have to activate it and commit it to a color during the game. You can't wait till the end of the game and then add it to your best color or whatever. So some really interesting abilities there, and that just shakes up the game just enough. I think the game is fascinating as it is, just with the colors and numbers, but those extra cards really add some nice flavor to this game. So that's Shanghaien. It's an unbelievably simple game to learn, but this one is a tricky game to master, and it just fascinates me how tense this game is and how much there is to keep an eye on because of that scoring system. You're always watching, the color distribution there between you and your opponent. Sometimes it's fun to kind of sneak in. Your opponent has lots of cards of a single color. If you can sneak in and just get a level 1 sailor, that destroys the value of their color. So there's some really interesting decisions to weigh of hurting your opponent versus helping yourself. I love that balancing act. And again, you really have to keep an eye on a lot of things here. There's plenty of ways to mitigate the luck of the dice as well. You roll 2 dice every time and you place 1, so that gives you some choices. You got those special cards you can go for, and I really like that neighboring rule for breaking ties. So the dice, luck is not as big of a deal here because you have lots of choices with your dice. Now there's still going to be some punishing moments, as you saw in my example. When I rolled that double 5, that really hurt me in that round because then my opponent just went in and ended the round. But I really like that rule in this game that allows the players to decide when the round ends. I think that gives the players a little more flexibility in driving this game. It's a very player-driven game, which I'm all about. Now, in my last 2-player episode, I covered a game called Piñata, and I would say this game reminds me a little bit of that, except with dice rolling, and it's a much different scoring system here. Both great games, by the way, both very different from each other, but if you like Piñata, also known as Balloon Cup, and if you like dice rolling, check this one out for sure. Fantastic game by one of my favorite designers, and it only takes like 20 minutes to play, which is awesome. It's a very small box, virtually no shelf space, virtually no setup time. You can just jump right into this. It's very portable, so definitely recommend Shanghaien. All right, we're going to look at one more game today for 2 players only, and this is one of my all-time favorites, by the way. It's called The Cousins War. This was originally from 2017, designed by David J. Mortimer, and then it was re-released with a second edition printing, which I have right here. And the second edition just has an expansion in the box. Anyway, this is a sort of a hybrid game. It's like half Euro game, half war game. It feels more like a Euro to me because it uses Euro mechanisms like multi-use cards and hand management, action points. It has some area majority scoring, but then it also has rolling dice for combat, and then you have some bluffing involved as well. So it's kind of this mashup of styles here, and it's really unique, unlike any other game I've played, honestly, and that's one of the reasons I like it so much. Another reason I like this is for some reason this game just feels thicker to me. It feels meatier. Like when I'm playing it, my decisions seem bigger. It feels like I'm playing a bigger game than I am. I would still consider this like a 2.5 out of 5 in complexity. Like it's not that complex, but when you first learn the game, there are quite a few little situational rules that you have to really grasp before you dive into this. So there's a little bit of barrier to entry there, but it's really not bad. I mean, once you learn the game, you can just look at this little reference card here and pretty much remember all the rules. It's really quite a simple idea here. So this game is based on the War of the Roses, and each player will be controlling one of the 2 houses. So the white player will control York, and the red player will control Lancaster. You'll be competing head-to-head in various battles over the course of 5 rounds, but ultimately you're trying to control more regions than your opponent at the end of those 5 rounds. However, if you manage to control all 3 regions at the end of any round in the game, you're going to win instantly. So keeping with the theme of the first 2 games on my list, this game also has multiple winning conditions, which makes the game really exciting and tense. Now the board shows a round tracker at the top. Again, the game lasts 5 rounds, or maybe less if somebody wins instantly. The map shows 3 regions. You have the North, Central, and South regions. Inside each region, you'll see some battles listed, and these represent actual battles that took place during this war, and then those battles correspond to these cards. We have this deck of cards. They're nice and big cards, by the way, with great artwork and visuals. Really adds to the beautiful aesthetics of this game. It's a really charming little small box game here. These cards are either going to show a battle with like the location and the date, or some cards just show an event. Also, every card has these little yellow dots up in the corner, and these are called command points. Basically, they're action points that you can spend to do various things. But these cards are multi-use cards, so you're either going to play this card as a battlefield, you're going to play it maybe as an event, or you're going to play it for its command points. But you have to, choose one of those. So you're going to be doing some hand management here, deciding which cards to use for which function. To set up the game, make a supply of cubes at the top of the board, and then each player takes 2 cubes into their reserves to start the game. So you have your reserves here, and then the general supply up here. Anyway, each player also starts with 1 cube in each region. So 1 red and 1 white goes in each of the 3 regions. So no player controls any of these regions yet. If you ever get a majority of cubes in a region, you control it. Pretty standard area majority stuff. Now shuffle all these cards together and deal 6 to each player. This is going to be your starting hand. The round always begins with the battlefield being determined. So each player has to choose 1 battle card from their hand and where they want to fight. So they both play these face down simultaneously, and then you reveal them. Whichever card has the earlier date listed, that's the battlefield for the round. So here, if we played these 2 cards, the Battle of Ludford Bridge has an earlier date. So this will be the battlefield. The other card just gets discarded. Now each player is down to a hand of 5 cards. Now you're going to look at the cube symbol on this battle card, and it's going to tell you to add a certain number of cubes of a certain color to the card. So here I take 1 red cube and add it to the card. Now I can choose if this comes from my reserve or from the supply up here. So let's say I add 1 from the supply. Now this battlefield card is going to fill up with cubes throughout the round, and then whoever wins the battle will get to add any cubes they have left on this card. They add them to the board. So think of this card as like the actual physical battlefield where it's taking place, and then the board sort of shows you a, photograph, an overview of what happened in the battles. That's kind of the way I think about it. Now that's a little oversimplified because you're going to be doing stuff on the board as well, but I just kind of, in my head thematically, this is where the fight is happening, and this is like the result of the fights. Anyway, now we proceed to prepare for this battle by playing action cards from our hand. We take turns playing 1 card at a time until we've played 4 of our 5 cards. At that point, we roll the dice and fight the battle. So when you play a card, you can either carry out the card's event, or you can use the command points at the top, those little yellow dots, but you can't do do both. Some cards even have a secondary event that's only available to a certain player during a certain round. So like after you do your main action, you might need to do that secondary action, or maybe your opponent has to do that secondary action. So some interesting depth there as far as like when to play these certain cards. Anyway, if you choose the event, you just do what the card says. It's very simple. Most of the events involve ways to add cubes to and from this battlefield, or even sometimes directly adding cubes to the board and things like that. However, if you choose to use the command points, you have lots of great options on how to use them, and the command points are really a big part of the strategy. Whoever played this battlefield card goes first. So I choose one card from my hand and play it. Let's say I want to use the command points on this card. So I play this Battle of Hexam card to use 2 command points at the top. So you basically have to choose one of the possible actions to spend your command points on. There are several options here. One option I have is just adding cubes from the supply to my reserve. It's just up to 1 cube per command point. So I could take up to 2 red cubes from here and add them to my reserve. Another option I have is just to take cubes from my reserve and add it to the battlefield card. Again, it's 1-to-1, so I could add up to 2 cubes from my reserve and place them on this card. Now, it's important to note I cannot split those command points between both of those actions. So I could not use like one command point to bring a cube into my reserve and then the other command point to put that cube onto the card. The command points have to stay within one action choice. So those are 2 separate actions. Another possible action is to shift my influence on the main board. So you choose one region and you can move cubes from adjacent regions into that region based on your command points. So you choose a region. Let's say I choose the central region and I have 2 command points to spend. So that says I can migrate 2 of my cubes into that central region from any adjacent region. So I could choose, this cube from up here and this cube from here. Now, there are 2 other ways to use command points, and these involve a bit of push your luck with dice rolling. It's kind of interesting, but this is another way to sway the main board in your favor. So you can either attempt to add your own cubes directly from your reserve to the board, skipping the battlefield, or you can attempt to remove one of your opponent's cubes directly off the board. And the command points just show you how many attempts you get to do this by rolling dice. So let's say I want to add a cube to the board. I have 2 attempts because I have 2 command points. So here's how this works. First, you choose a region. Let's say I want to attempt to place a cube into the southern region. I place the cube there. So including this cube, I have 2 cubes now in the southern region. Now that's important because the number 2 is now the number I have to beat with my dice roll. So I'm going to roll 1 die. I have to roll greater than a 2. If I roll greater than 2, it's a success and that cube gets to stay there. If I roll equal to a 2, that cube is returned to just my reserve, so I don't lose it completely. But if I roll less than a 2, this cube gets lost back to the supply. So let's say in this example, I roll a 4. I'm successful, that cube stays. Now I still have another attempt because remember I had 2 command points and that's 2 attempts. So I could try to add another cube to the board, but because I was successful here, I just have to choose a different region. So maybe on my next attempt, I try to add a cube to the north region. But again, I have to have a cube in my reserve to be able to place out there. So that's kind of how that works if you want to use your command points to try to get influence directly onto the board. So the fewer cubes you have out there, the better chance you'll have of being successful. The more cubes you have on the board, the harder it will be to add more to the board. It's kind of neat how it balances out like that. The final way to spend command points on this phase of the game is if you want to try to remove one of your opponent's cubes. So you do a similar method. I have 2 command points, which means I have 2 attempts to remove one of my opponent's cubes. So I just choose a region where they have a cube. If I roll less than the number of cubes, their cube goes back to the supply. If I roll equal to their number of cubes, that cube gets returned to their reserve. And if I roll greater than their number of cubes, I fail and their cubes stay. So here I would get 2 attempts to try to do this. However, since my opponent only has 1 cube here, I can't roll less than a 1. So like the best I could do is roll a 1, which puts this back into their reserve. So this option gets more tempting as your opponent gets more cubes out there. Again, it's a nice balancing system here. So there's a really nice reference card, by the way, that helps you remember all this stuff. Once you learn the game, this reference card is pretty much all you'll need. And the rulebook is really well written as well. It's kind of hard to briefly explain everything in this game because there's a lot of little things like that to keep in mind. But once you learn it, it sticks in your head. It's really not that bad. So basically each player takes turns playing one card, either using those command points or using the event on the card. The battlefield will fill up with cubes as you do this, and then once you've each played 4 cards, now you fight the battle. So let's fast forward here. Let's say the round played out and there's some cubes on this card, and now we're ready to fight the battle. So if both players have cubes on the card, you just fight until only one player has cubes there. That player wins the battle, and then they get to put their cubes on the board. Now, if you start the battle and only one player has cubes there, well, they win automatically, so we don't even have to fight it. So basically, you look at the region where the battle is taking place. Here it's in the central region. Whoever controls this region on the map begins the battle as the active player. And if it's a tie, it's just whoever played this battle card. So anyway, the active player rolls 3 dice, and you keep these secret. Now, I have to make a declaration about what I rolled. And this is where the bluffing and the mind games come in. This is really fun. So I can either say I rolled singles, doubles, or triples of a specific number. So let's say I actually rolled a 3, 4, 5. I'm going to lie and say I have triple 4s. Now, my opponent can either accept my declaration as fact, and then we just move on, or they can call my bluff. If they accept it, now they have to beat that roll by rolling 3 of their dice. So they would have to beat triple 4s by rolling triple 5s or 6s. Now, if they want to call my bluff, now I have to show what I actually rolled. Remember when we had that leftover action card? We played 4 of our 5 cards, so we have 1 action card left. Now, at this point in the game, I have the chance to play this action card and use these command points to alter my dice roll. And I'm allowed to move each die up 1 or down 1, so I could use 1 command point to change this 5 into a 4 and use my other command point to make this 3 into a 4. So now I actually have triple 4s. But again, you can only move each die up or down 1 dot. So for this example, let's say I did have the triple 4s. My opponent did call my bluff. So because I was lying, they don't lose a cube. But because I matched my declaration, I don't lose a cube either. But now my opponent has to try to beat the triple 4s. So they roll 3 dice. Then they would have a chance to alter their dice in that same way using the command points. So let's say they rolled a 3, 5, 6. Now, you cannot alter the dice more than 1, so there's no way they're going to beat me here by spending command points. So they could just keep that card in their hand, or they could still use their card to make that into a 3, 5, 5. And I'll tell you why they might want to do that. If triples beat doubles, then the loser has to lose 2 of these cubes off the battlefield. If triples beat singles, then the loser has to lose 3 of these cubes off the battlefield. So even when you lose a battle, you still might want to alter your dice a little bit so you don't have to lose as many cubes. So that's a really neat system here. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around at first, but it really makes sense because it's just singles, doubles, or triples, and then triples always beat doubles always beat singles, and then the numbers always beat each other. So triple 5s would beat triple 3s, and so on. So you just shake out the battle like that, and you keep doing this. So after all that, if both players still have cubes on the battlefield, you switch active players, and you do it again. So the other player will roll 3 dice, make a declaration, and then you play it out that same way. And once one player is left standing on this card, they get to place any remaining cubes they have into this region or an adjacent region on the map. Whoever won the battle takes the battle card and keeps it off to the side somewhere, and this just tracks how many battles you won during the game. Now, you have to check to see if anybody is controlling all 3 of these regions, because at this point, if one player controls all 3 regions, they win the game instantly. It ends right there. But if that did not happen, then you just advance the round tracker up 1, and you do another round in that same way. So you're going to mix all these cards back together. Everybody draws up so they have 6 cards in their hand, and then you start again. You choose the battlefield, and so on. Now, if the game lasts all 5 rounds, then at the end of the 5th round, you check the map, and whoever controls more regions wins the game there. If it's still a tie, then you have to look at whoever won more battles over the course of the game. And that's why you keep those battle cards. It's like the tiebreaker at the very end. So whoever won the most battles would win in that situation. So that's the gist of the game. I did not cover every rule. And if you know me, you know I hate games with fiddly rules. And I know this seems like it might have a lot of fiddly rules, but I promise you it does not. This game just sticks in my head. I don't really need to consult the rulebook anymore. I think the very first time we learned the game, it seemed like it might be a little fiddly, but once we played through it once, we're like, let's just do it again. And that second game was so smooth and quick. And now this is a go-to game for my wife and me. We really like this one because it has some nice thickness to it, some nice depth in the decision space. We love the dice rolling. It's really exciting and fun. The bluffing is a lot of fun. So this game really mixes, some Euro game, like really thinky decisions with some really exciting dice rolling. And that might be a weird mashup for some of you, but I really like the way this game does it. Anyway, I'm going to stop the video short there. I really meant to cover 2 other games on this list, and I'm just going to have to save those for a future 2-player games episode. So I definitely recommend all 4 of these that I covered today. Have you ever played any of these? Which one of these looks the most fun to you? Is there another 2-player game out there that you think deserves more attention? Let me know all that stuff in the comments below. If you like my content and you want to help support my work of finding and sharing these lesser known games, there are several ways you can help out the channel. Just check the video description below. The easiest way to help out is to make sure you click subscribe right here on YouTube at undiscovered_games and get a few of your board gaming friends to subscribe as well, because as long as my subscribers keep going up, I'll continue to release content on a regular basis. There's also a digital tip jar in the description below. If you want to directly support the channel, you can leave a small donation there. It's just a PayPal link. I do not expect that whatsoever, but it is there if you want to help me keep the lights on and keep the channel alive. I really, really appreciate all of you who have donated so far. Seriously, this is a labor of love doing this YouTube channel. I just do this in my free time, and it does take a lot of work to put these videos together, but I'm really passionate about these older, forgotten games and just showcasing them and highlighting them because I think there's just so many great games out there to discover. I have hundreds of games on my list of episodes that I want to make. So as long as all my viewers out there continue to, support this channel, watch my stuff, comment, share, subscribe, get some other people to subscribe, as long as you guys are out there doing that, then this channel will stay alive and I will bring all those episodes to you on a regular basis. One more reminder is we are only 2 episodes away from my top 50. That episode 50 is right around the corner. I've been doing a lot of revisiting of games in my collection and a lot of mulling over in my head which 50 games are worthy of that list. And I found it's quite difficult to put together a top 50, and I'm just a very indecisive person when it comes to that sort of thing. But I do want to do that episode as a context episode so you can kind of see, what my favorite games are. And I just think that's important every once in a while to do a top 10 or a top 50 for context. So anyway, that's coming up in 2 more episodes, but we still have 1 more regular episode coming out in a couple weeks, so stay tuned for that. And until then, I'm your undiscovered host saying thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you on the next one.